Flashpoint with Devin Skillian.
On the next Flashpoint, growing pains. From Eastern Market to District Detroit, can Detroit's past keep up with its present?
Flashpoint today at 10, only on Local 4.
Going on now at Art Van Furniture and Mattress. It's our biggest Memorial Day sale ever. Save up to $1,200 on top name brand mattresses. Plus, get instant credit with 0% for up to 72 months. Free same-day delivery. Free TVs or free power base upgrades. Tempur-Pedic as low as $28 a month. Huge doorbusters. Serta Perfect Sleeper $298. Find your better sleep for less at the Art Van Furniture and Mattress Memorial Day sale and all Pure Sleep stores.
Diamonds at their lowest price in years. Half-carat solitaires are now $3.99, 1 carat $7.90, 2 carat $9.50 per carat, plus 1 carat studs $3.99. Insane prices on thousands of GIA diamonds and designer rings. Buy direct. The Jewelry Exchange, Livonia.
An iconic lunch spot in an even more iconic neighborhood sparks debate about the future and the soul of Eastern Market. And is the promise of District Detroit being fulfilled or falling short? Today is Sunday, May 19th, 2019, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. If you have been waiting for a sign of spring, today is Flower Day at Eastern Market, and that for me may be the surest sign of spring of all. And it's fitting because this morning we're going to talk about Detroit's growing pains, and Eastern Market will be our port of call for that conversation. It was a heartbreaker for Eastern Market's vast legion of devotees to hear that the Russell Street Deli is going to close. For some, it was the loss of a favorite breakfast and lunch joint. It bordered on the spiritual for the Travel Channel's Andrew Zimmern, who referred to it as a sanctuary. For others, it was confirmation of the fears that surfaced when word broke that Sanford Nelson and his father Lyndon Nelson were buying up a lot of Eastern Market real estate. The fears seemed reasonable. Who buys anything with the intention of leaving it just as it is? That ratcheted up considerably when Russell Street owner Ben Hall took to social media to torch the Nelsons, adding, "It's hard enough to make a sandwich without some guy's hand deep in your pocket." Nelson has tried to make his case that he's not interested in a Starbucks and a Pizza Hut and wants to preserve the market's singular identity. But it frames some very difficult questions that stretch all over Detroit just now. It is always a tricky dance, trying to marry progress with respect for where you've been and what got you there, trying to balance prosperity with inclusion, the future with the past. Dan Carmody heads the Eastern Market Corporation, and as he told me recently, everybody tells him they want two things: to just keep things like they are and to make it all better. Can you do both? We're going to take measure of those growing pains this morning, and we're going to start with Ben Hall of Russell Street Deli. He's up first today on Flashpoint. Word came in late April that the Russell Street Deli in Eastern Market was going to shut down. The reaction was quite a bit bigger than you might expect for a small spot that's really only open for lunch except on Saturdays when there's generally a wait to get in for breakfast or brunch. One of Russell Street's co-owners, Ben Hall, wrote a widely shared post on social media that was a bitter missive in a way toward his landlord, Sanford Nelson, that to many, though, spoke to issues that are beyond just one Eastern Market tenant. And Ben Hall is my guest this morning. Ben, thanks very much for coming in.
Good morning.
Busy day for you. In fact, you're not usually open on Sundays, but you are on Flower Day.
It's true.
A busy day.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that now, as the dust is starting to settle around the decision, the shock has worn off for some people, I think you can probably see your place now in this bigger conversation about the way that Detroit is trying to evolve. While we trying to protect one thing and great institutions like the Russell Street Deli, even as a new kind of prosperity kind of starts to look the place over.
Well, I think that our long-term goal was to stay open for a long time. We are viewed as a heritage restaurant, which is a hard thing to achieve. It's hard to keep a restaurant open for a couple years, let alone 30 years. So I've worked there since 1996. I've been in the market since 1984. My dad was in the market before that. So for me, it's more this idea that you're going to try to capture something and make it real so that there is a kind of beacon, even when things are good or whether things are bad. But I mean, of course, you're seeing this in other cities.
Do you really, is your sense as you leave that you were chased out by a greedy landlord, or is that just too much of a headline for it? It's a little more complicated than that.
I think it's a bit more complicated. I think it was a poor negotiation. having studied negotiation as my college major, I know a little bit about it and the modes of it. And I think that they probably expected us to pay for some upgrades of their building, which we couldn't do that. And we thought it was both unconscionable, but I also explained in the meeting that it was important for us to think about what we would be able to do day to day, being able to shell out that kind of money.
$50,000 to I guess, basically replace the floor inside. Typically, that's supposed to be the good thing about having a landlord, is that the upkeep is up to them. But in this case, I suppose the argument was that, well, the damage is on you guys. You guys are the ones that have been in there for so long. You need to pay to repair it.
There's certainly, I mean, every lawyer that we had looked at it, and the restaurant is flooded with lawyers every day, so I have a quorum of lawyers that I can show certain legal documents to for the cost of a soup or sandwich, which is lower than their normal rate. All the people that handled commercial said this is a commercial issue. Even if they had the building, they've only had the building for 8 months.
Right.
Even if that building was our responsibility, which it's not by all terms that we can see, we didn't do that damage in the last 8 months. We also didn't do that damage over the last 30 years. Every contractor that I've had in there over the last 20 years has called me and said, like, oh, I would be happy to come in here and say that floor was destroyed in 1989 or 1990, and it's lucky that it has lasted this long. And I think that that's the key point that I was trying to illustrate in the Facebook post, is that we tried to maintain that place when there wasn't a lot of street side retail in Detroit. And there's no pushback towards that if we want to stay in business. We can't negotiate out of that.
Well, I think that the Nelsons have, Sanford Nelson has tried to suggest that this was all negotiable, that this could have been worked out between you all, but that you had kind of made up your mind at a certain point to not. Did it feel work-outable to you, or is it just past the point of rescue, even today as we sit here?
Definitely at this point. I mean, we've made other arrangements to work around, but I think when someone
close in September
28th, I think when someone brings up litigation early in a negotiation, you don't really have a lot of recourse in terms of trying to make it solvable. I know in their first responses they said we had always approached this goodwill and we had hoped to work it out amicably. But that's just not accurate. Business is hard enough and dirty enough on its own without adding any elements that make it more complicated. I mean, it's a bit like dating, but it's also a relationship. And I think it's not just the deli. I think what the post showed, which was like 80,000 clicks and 3,000 shares. It's been shared all over the world. I think what that showed is that we are articulating something that a lot of people couldn't articulate about the position that we're in, but we're also not the only restaurant that's closed.
In fact, describe for me exactly how you suppose you'll describe this, as what happened to you, what happened to Russell Street Deli. In a nutshell.
I'm not very nostalgic, so I'm not the best person to say that. I mean, part of the reason that we wrote the post was actually to comment towards and comfort, I guess is probably the right word. A lot of the people who were responding really poorly and had lots of different questions, and so we were trying to answer all that questions. But I think the next stage is one that we'll be able to find a new restaurant somewhere. I think as I was telling you before, something that's really important to note is that if I had a little soup company and my soup company went somewhere else, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It would just be a business that moved.
Sure, we'd see it as an institution the way we do. A lot of people feel, in fact, as many people as I have talked to me about the Russell Street, I can't imagine what it's been like for you every day to listen to people lament what's about to happen. But there was also a suggestion that, you've got a wholesale business that's doing very well, and that really this was kind of a convenient villain for you to say, well, this was because of the landlord. And it really, because as you just said, you're really not all that nostalgic about the place, it seems, that maybe it was just time to move on anyway. Is that anything to that?
No, I'm an honest person. If it was time to move on, I would have moved on. I know that had come up several times in terms of commentary, and also people saying, oh, just pay the 50 grand. I mean, it's not our responsibility. B, we have a lease that's good till 2026. So we shouldn't have to renegotiate that lease. We shouldn't even have to spend the time to do that. But I think more to the point is that if I just had a soup company, not only would we not be having this conversation, but I wouldn't have a constituency to speak about what this is.
Sure.
And I think that this is the moment where I'm also articulating what a lot of other restaurants and businesses who've been pushed out are saying.
What is your sense of the mood among everybody else right now in Eastern Market?
In the market, I can't tell. I can only tell you that all of the people who've reached out to work with us, they have a positive mood about a lot of the other areas in Detroit that could use a restaurant like ours. Or maybe it's not even the same place. Maybe it's not eggs and bacon, but maybe it's barbecue or something else. Mm-hmm. There's so many places that need anchor businesses that aren't trying to, I would say, be extortionary and get more money than you can make. I mean, most restaurants that don't have booze make between 1% and 3% profit margin over the year. So even if you make $1 million at the end of the year, you got $30,000 to split up. It's not a lot of money.
Well, a Russell Street awning anywhere would, I imagine there's a good group of folks who will follow you wherever you go. I really appreciate you being here this morning and talking about it. Best luck to you and your employees. I want to also mention we did invite Sanford Nelson to be here this morning, and he declined our invitation. But we'll talk about, with our roundtable here in just a minute, this broader picture of trying to move forward while respecting the past and what's already here at the same time. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
BBB accreditation boosts credibility with your customers, and it increases your visibility online. How's that for a competitive advantage? Apply for BBB accreditation today. Visit bbb.org to learn more.
The region is on the rise. Project after project, building, growing, innovating. We're building the future right now. Hard work matters here. IBEW Local 58 electricians and NECA signatory contractors bring commitment, pride, expertise, and passion to every job. It's our code of excellence. One vision, one team, one mission. To build the very best Michigan for all of us. Put us to work for you. The best contractors, the best electricians, period.
I'm Eric Frazee, General Manager of Tamaroff Motors. While being the first car dealer in Southfield, it's been incredible to be a cornerstone of the community that's been built here. Same building, same business, same ownership, same family, 50 years.
T-minus 10, 9, 8.
It's not rocket science, folks. If you want powerful cashback rebates on the best furniture with no tax, go to Gardner White now. This weekend, you get an extra $100 back for every $500 you spend, with no tax on everything. Right now, you can get up to $1,000 cash back, tax-free. There's no limit to how much you can save.
3, 2, 1.
Add it up. It's not rocket science, it's simple math. Sunday and Monday, the proof is in the tax-free prices at Gardner White.
Tonight at 11, she's the undisputed champ. Claressa Shields has fought her way to her 5th boxing title, and she calls Flint home. Now, hear her inspiring message for kids who idolize her.
You are in control of your life. You are in control of your life.
And her advice for the men who think she's probably not all that tough.
Men just felt so intimidated that they just said, oh, a regular guy off the street can beat you. You better not ever try.
Tonight on Local 4 News at 11.
Welcome back. Let's stay with the way Detroit is growing and developing and at whose expense it might come. With our roundtable, good to have with us Chad Livengood here from Detroit, Crane's Detroit Business. Let me try to get all that in the right order. Dennis Archer Jr. from Ignition Media Group is back, and a downtown business owner, I will also point out. Portia Roberson is here, the CEO of Focus Hope, and Nolan Finley is the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Gang, thanks very much for being here. Chad, let me start with you. You've been writing a lot about what's going on in downtown development right now, and we can start to stretch this conversation out a little bit from Eastern Market. But the worries around the way that this happens, nobody expects success to not be pretty expensive for those who've already been in place. But what are you hearing about the worries about the way Detroit's growing pains are starting to be felt?
Well, people are starting to look at trying to understand how is this comeback affecting me? How is it spreading? Who is really getting impact on it? And along the way, we're seeing there's some victims to this. I mean, not all boats are rising, and some boats are just getting sunk, like what's going on at Russell Street Deli. And so this is sort of a natural progression, though. I mean, this has happened in other cities where you have a downtrodden area that's gotten revitalized and new businesses and new clientele and new residents move in, and things and attitudes change.
Dennis, people like to say, there are a lot of loaded words in this, like gentrification, but really what Chad is describing is, of course, when someplace starts to succeed, it gets more expensive to do business there. You can do things like the mayor has tried to do with keeping, say, 20% set aside for low-income, affordable housing, but some people say, look, grow up. This is what happens in a successful city. What are your thoughts?
Well, I disagree with that statement, to grow up. I think that change is inevitable, but how one goes about instituting change, you can go down a couple of different paths. I mean, this is not expanding in the early times of the United States out west to barren land. There are 600,000 or 700,000 Detroiters that have been here through thick and thin. And so to think that people can come in and without thought or care for the heritage, tradition, the stick-to-itiveness for people who have been here for decades, to just come in and plop down dollars and displace people is not the right approach. Having said that, though,
and you found yourself in your own kind of argument over this with the Paradise Valley business.
Absolutely. And so what we looked at is what is the right approach to take for the people that are affected. And so, both there where we have said, hey, you can stay, to the people that are paying on time. We're going to make improvements. We're going to honor your lease through the end of your lease. But at the end of that lease, we may have to renegotiate, but you're entitled to stay until your lease is up. But Devin, people talk about, we complain about the roads being damaged, right? We're going to fix the damn roads, but then we complain about the orange barrels. I mean, Dan Carmody mentioned in the segment prior, he talks about people wanting Eastern Market to stay the same, but they want it to be better. And so you can't do both easily. It takes a lot of, address by address, storefront by storefront.
It also, Portia, takes a fair amount of finesse to help control the message and the management of it. I mentioned Sanford Nelson didn't want to come on. We've invited Chris Ilitch to come on to talk about with District Detroit, which I'm going to get to with Nolan here in just a second. But some of these messages are not being maybe managed all that well.
And that's, I think, a huge part of it. I think that in many ways, well, first off, I think we have to be more intentional about making sure that people who have been here and who've been doing business here know that they're still welcome here and that they have a place here, right? And I think that there was sort of this idea that there were new people coming in and we forgot that there were people here. I think I've said this before here, that there have been people here who were here because they wanted to be here, not because they couldn't go anyplace else, not because they couldn't do business anyplace else. They wanted to be in Detroit, and they have been successful, and they want to stay, right? So there's part of that. The other part is absolutely the messaging behind it. There is a way in which you approach the change that is going to happen, right? As the city progresses, there's going to be change, but there's a message in how you respond to that and how you get out what you are trying to do. And I think the idea is that, certainly with the District Detroit program or neighborhood, it is the sense that we were told that we were getting one thing, we haven't gotten that, and it's sort of like, we'll get to telling you what we're gonna do next when we feel like it. And it's not really coming out there and saying, well, look, there have been some delays, but we're gonna still do what we told you we were gonna do in the beginning.
Nolan, you have really been taking the Ilitches to task with a couple of columns lately about what isn't happening in your view, and yet they just received another
unconscionable
big pile of $74 million as part of the agreement because of what they have spent. So I guess the Ilitches would say, look, we were due that money because we have spent a lot of money there, and that these protestations are either, at the very least, premature.
I think it's time to start talking about what the Ilitches have done for the city and start talking about what they're doing to the city. And what they're doing is breaking promises. We all went out there when they unveiled this grand plan for District Detroit, 5 distinct neighborhoods that would be transformational, connect downtown Detroit to Midtown, fill up all of this sort of area that had been blighted, and they're not doing that. What they're doing is breaking promises, and we keep rewarding them for that. I think that the mayor should be calling them out. I think the city should be looking at all of this property that they helped assemble. They sold them some of this property at $1 a lot. They issued demolition permits in the expectation that we would get this grand district, and we're not getting it.
Who's responsible then? The Ilitches or Kevin Orr as emergency manager who crafted the deal?
Both. Both. But the Ilitches promised something they're not delivering. And it's not enough now to say, what? We gave you $200 million in development. They did not build the district, and they're not building the district. And from the looks of those parking lots, which are producing revenue for Joe Louis Arena, but doing nothing LCA, I'm sorry, I'm behind the times, but doing nothing for the overall rebirth of downtown Detroit, I think they should be held accountable.
Go ahead.
I think we mentioned communication earlier, and I think in talking about Eastern Market, and I just think that, look, being someone who's involved in development, delays do happen. You know, construction costs has skyrocketed 30% in the past 18 months. There could be a rationale as to why they are behind in their development plans, but we should be able to hear about it from their mouths.
Yeah, I mean,
my only issue with them, I don't know all the facts. I don't
they
know
apparently
why the
did lose
hasn't
their partner that was going to be a part of a lot of this neighborhood construction. But Chad, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, this is really a problem with expectation management. Don't show me the steak that I don't eat.
Yeah, and some of that losing partners is their own problem, according to reporting from my colleagues Bill Shea and Kirk Pino, that there are real estate developers and residential real estate developers that decided we don't want to work with the Ilitches. And they have a little bit of a reputation for being difficult to work with for some people in town, but it's hard to get answers out of them. They've had an incomplete facade on their headquarters building right on Woodward Avenue with black board over the top window for a year, and can't get an answer out of them. There's people in there working. I mean, it's just kind of a strange thing. This is the pizza slice shaped glass. It's really neat and unique, but they can't get. No one can get an answer out of why this is taking so long or what's wrong. Is there some kind of design defect? I mean, these are kind of things that nobody at City Hall is actually policing this, as far as we can tell.
Devin, they're property hoarders. They own hundreds of properties, hundreds of lots, buildings that they've had for decades that are not being developed. You look at every other developer. You look at Bedrock. Look at the Roxbury Group. They buy a building, they start working on the building, they put the building back in use. The Ilitches buy a piece of property, buy a building, and there it sits. And it sits there for decades.
Well, in their defense, I guess they would say that we have to amass much more property to try and create a stadium rather than to build a hotel.
This goes back to 1987. They've been amassing this property and sitting on it. Who else is doing that?
And Portia, I think to your point earlier, it'd be one thing if we can't break through a boardroom of a private entity who doesn't really owe us necessarily answers. But when you take more than $300 million in public financing, more than $400 million in private financing, you probably owe somebody
people some answers. Yes. Right, absolutely. You can't just stonewall people and tell them that, oh, well, and certainly I was part of the group that saw those grandiose plans. And so to drive by there and see this, beautiful arena and not see anything else around there, no stores, no retail, no residential, not even
the neighborhoods were given names.
Right,
was
absolutely,
what I remember.
absolutely. And what's really interesting is that there were people who said this all along. The people who were there did not want to sell. They were really adamant that this is not going to happen. They are not going to produce. They were holding out, some for more money, but some just knew that they had their experiences and they were like, I don't want to go anywhere. And people said, no, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to do it anyways. They're going to be great this time. They're not.
I'm wondering now where all of this leads, because my hunch is with Ford setting up shop in a major way in Corktown. In fact, we're already watching what's happening with property values in Corktown. We're going to have a whole other section of just away from downtown that's going to need managing. And a lot of people might find themselves on the squeeze.
Well, I think you've seen this happening in Corktown already. Yeah. I mean, this has been happening for years in Corktown. If you follow the bell curve, you had the early adopters, and then ultimately the influencers come in, and now you've got empty nesters from the suburbs coming to move into Corktown, and the rents there are already like the rents in Brooklyn. And so it's already happening. Now with Ford dropping a significant presence there, I mean, it's just going to get worse. But to me, that presents an opportunity. So if there are developers, if there are builders who want to go beyond Corktown in the southwest for the people to get priced out of there, that's the opportunity for young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who don't have as deep pockets to go out into the next, open terrain.
I guess that's the hopeful sign here is as we move some of the people who can't play, I guess, in the majors, AAA and AA ball starts to happen as we move out.
There is a vast section of land north of 75 in North Corktown, the original part of Corktown, that got cut off by the interstate when it was put through, and that's sitting there waiting for residential development. To no one's point, though, when you look at west of Grand River going up, with the Illiches controlling so much of it and the district being so parking lotted up that section, that's where this is the concern is you can't leave this hole in downtown that's full of parking lots and expect the rest of this